Islam, and according to the Christian Catholic intellectual speaker, Craig? No. The Irish, what's his name? He, as a Christian, he said, the first man in human history that made it a legal obligation that slavery was abolished was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Absolute lie.
I mean, yeah.
I knew I was going to pause it there.
Yeah, I mean, to stand there and try to claim that, one of you two, please, because I'm facepalming at the moment. I can't deal with it.
Well, there's not much to say. It's just false, isn't it? There's no abolition of slavery here. I mean, he made that distinction about just running around grabbing, random people. And yeah, the rules of taking slaves under a jihad can be seen as that restriction. But yeah, this is nothing he's described, nothing that we've talked about is anything close to an abolition of slavery.
And I mean, the man who came there to make slavery forbidden was a slave trader. How can you take that seriously? Muhammad owned slaves himself. Yet here is the man that forbids slavery. Yeah, that really makes sense.
He talked about it historically as well. I mean, the Roman Empire, or 2nd century, they had laws, if I remember correctly, that a slave could, an owner could be prosecuted for the murder of a slave. This is it. When you have a society in which you have a large population of slaves within it, people treating them extremely poorly to the point at which these people have nothing to lose apart from fight, they will fight and you get slave rebellions. So a general kind of code of not taking it too far, though you can still treat them badly, it's just safer for your society. It's about self-interest. It's not about caring about slaves.
Yeah, I mean, even in in the United States, there were, you could be prosecuted for certain, excessive cruelty to your slaves in certain situations, stuff like that. It wasn't just that you were allowed to necessarily do anything. I mean, in practice, obviously, many slave owners did, just as they did in Islam, but there were considered certain restrictions. You shouldn't be excessively cruel, and it differed from state to state, and it differed over time as well. I mean, a slave in America in 1850 was doing a lot better than a slave in 1750. I mean, it doesn't make slavery any less disgusting and immoral and barbaric, but yeah, this idea that Islam was the only other system that had, all these lovely-dovely kind of regulations that were so beautiful for the slaves, and everybody else, it was just like open season on the slaves, and that was it. Lie.
Also, guys, this statement by Abbas, it really triggered me. So, if you'll remember, he said this Craig guy, Christian, says that Muhammad was the first person to legally abolish slavery, and I was like, well, no, that doesn't sound right to me. So, and it wasn't William Lane Craig actually. So I went off, I did some research, and I found the guy. Dr. Craig Considine, an American sociologist, and actually he did say that Muhammad was the first man to legally abolish slavery. But guess what? He's a scholar of Islam. He is in no way a Christian. So, yeah, disingenuous again.
Well, we'll have to find out more about that and verify it. Does it make any explicit statements as to his religion?
Well, he's quoted on his own website, an American sociologist who is a scholar of Islam. So he's not a Christian. Maybe at one point he was, but the statements that come from him regarding Muhammad are as he is a Muslim. So there is no Christian doctor that is saying Muhammad, well, at least this doctor isn't saying that Muhammad was legally abolishing slavery. It's a Muslim doctor who perhaps has converted to Islam who's saying that.
Yeah, but you can get scholars of, Quran, and there's a lot of guys in Oxford that do, have advanced knowledge on Islam, but they're not necessarily Muslims. It's all my concern is there. I think it'd be nice to have an explicit statement saying, I'm a Muslim or I'm a Christian or whatever.
Yeah, good point.
Shall we move on?
Now, I know there was some slavery that happened. Yes, there was slavery that happened. Even in the Islamic civilization, people who did not abide by those teachings.
But those exceptions should be the norm.
Those are the exceptions, they're not the norm, right? And in fact, what does the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, say? He said, the man who enslaves a free man and consumes his profit, I will be at war with him on the Day of Judgment. I will be at war. Allah and His Prophet will be at war with the person who
I thought that was with riba. I didn't know
who goes and enslaves a free person and then consumes the profit.
So in a nutshell, it goes back to that first criteria that if the Prophet didn't allow a
Second, can we pause that a sec?
Yeah.
What does he mean by consume the profit? Does he mean not give Muhammad his cut? The war booty, give him 20% of what the slave is worth or something, because that sounds a very odd way. It's not just goes and enslaves a free man. It says and then consumes the profit. So
yeah, it's another one of those criteria, isn't it? Is it actually saying don't enslave the free man, or is it just saying don't enslave the free man and then take the profit?
That's what it sounded like he said.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Smile, did you look at that hadith? I didn't know if you got round to it or not. Oh?
Oh yeah, sorry, I was just looking up Dr. Craig Considine. Yeah, you're right. He does claim to be a Christian, but he does believe Muhammad is a prophet. So that's interesting.
Well, that's not Christian, but okay.
Yeah, sorry. No, I didn't look at that hadith, by the way.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
I
maybe.
didn't get a chance either.
Maybe we can have a look at that later. And
Yeah, it seemed really vague. I'm wondering if it's even going to look like how he pronounced it, but we'll see.
He's definitely not going to allow her to be harmed. And that really finishes the discussion.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
it does.
Yeah.
Hopefully so.
Alhamdulillah, inshallah.
I was supposed to send this the video, but I was just going to ask. So by the way, if the husband passed away, she should get some of the inheritance. She entitled to.
I'm not sure of this. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I
Notice how they recoil at the subject of inheritance. It's hilarious.
oh, don't get me started.
They know it's a massive pitfall. And it's an immediate, we don't know about this. This is way beyond us.
Yeah, it's what was it? Rain Man math. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Hamza, Rain Man Mathematics.
Yeah.
Adding fractions, yeah.
But now what you're talking about is like supererogatory benefits of. Do you understand? So we're well beyond the. Are you mistreating them? With like, what other benefits do they get?
Okay, I'll just ask just
Sure.
but that's fine. Sure.
I mean, the fact that we're instructed, feed them what you eat. Clothe them the way you're clothed. In other words, don't give them torn rags.
And they don't pay zakat, by the way.
And they don't have to pay zakat. And don't overburden them with work. If they're in servitude to you, you can't basically say, right, you're doing 16-hour shifts. Start digging ditches.
Pause it there. I would love to see the hadith which says you can't give them a 16-hour shift. I mean, if he can produce that, then I'm converting to Islam, quite frankly.
It's in the 0 hours contract of the hadith. You have to look really hard.
So, this is just something that just came to me. It says you've got to give them the food that you eat. You could interpret that as just like, yeah, you can give them a scrap from your table once you finish your meal. They can have the bits that are left. Technically, they're eating the same meal as you, aren't they?
Yeah, same with the clothes. I mean, your cast-offs would be the clothes you wear, so yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, not quite as good as it sounds.
No, don't overburden them. And just for a slap, the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, free the slave, free this person.
There are so many rulings in Islam. Like if you want to raise your status, purify, free the slave.
Free a slave.
Oh, yeah.
I've done this wrong. What should I do? Free the slave. It was just a mechanism for trying to minimize this as much as possible, and it comes from that verse in the Quran which says, "Free the slaves."
The wife of the Prophet, Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, it became so difficult for us to do this righteous deed because we couldn't find anybody that was still left in this servitude, which is the modern way of saying slavery.
Did we find anything on that one?
No,
No.
I don't know about this hadith, but it just sounds like absolute rubbish. You know, considering that slavery has been ubiquitous throughout Islamic history, I can't imagine there was ever a time when they were running out of slaves because they, freed so many.
Yeah, well, exactly. Oh no, we're going to have to start feeding the poor instead.
No. We'll have to start enslaving some new people so we can start freeing them again.
Yeah, I mean, considering actually that they went pretty much on a, colonial kind of imperialist takeover of whole of North Africa and in Spain, and slavery was all part of that, then, the flow of slaves didn't ever stop. So, yeah.
Yeah. And the Quran does talk about how, I think it's, let me just bring it up, Surah 33, verse 50. Prophet, we've made lawful for you the wives whose bride gift you have already paid, and any slaves God has assigned to you through war. So it's a valid mechanism for picking up new slaves. Just go and fight new people.
Yeah. And they did for a long, long time.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, we could not find anyone that we could go and pay and free because everyone was basically freeing them to try to attain righteousness, which is what the Quran said. So, subhanAllah, when they quote these things,
And nobody was none of the poor were getting fed because they just had such an abundance of slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those poor guys, never got
A lot of people
meal.
starve to death, but that's,
Yeah.
fuck them, it doesn't matter, does it?
So what you can't do is you can't take away certain systems overnight. It wouldn't work. Imagine a society that has slavery within it, and then you free everyone. There's no one to do pick the crops. There's no one to do the economy would just crash.
Yeah.
So what you do is you have to do it in a sensible way. You have to systematically break it down and get rid of it. The same way the alcohol, you can't suddenly say stop. America tried it in 1920s. They tried to ban alcohol.
Yeah, and I remember learning about
it didn't work.
No, but I'll go further. Just imagine that at that time you abolished slavery. Now you have all these slaves who need to be fed and clothed and housed. Now I'm a businessman. My parents, we're from India. We're Gujaratis, right? We're proper business people.
I'm from Bangladesh.
The Jews and the Gujaratis, the Indian Gujaratis, we're known for entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
You know what I would start doing? Okay. So now there's all these free slaves. Under Islam, if they're under my servitude, they need to eat what I have to eat, clothe the way I have to clothe. I can't overwork them. I can't take advantage of them. Hey, that's all gone now. You're not in my servitude anymore, mate. I need my fields done, but guess what? You had...
I mean, isn't this a terrible argument? He's basically saying if he was given opportunity, he'd be even worse than what we're reading about.
Yeah, and he's also saying this logistical nightmare of having to look after your slave. I mean, God forbid that you look after them, but on the other hand, you're getting completely free labor and all these other things that a slave provides. So, yeah.
Well, you're certainly going to have to do something about your sex needs, aren't you? If they're no longer being fulfilled by your slaves.
Yeah,
It's
the
like-
idea that you're going to give up. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it is a complete contradiction because, 2 seconds before, Imran's saying, if you free all the slaves, then economic collapse, everything's going to fall apart. And Abbas is saying, Oh yeah, well, the system of upkeeping your slaves, it's so generous, so much material benefit for the slaves that as a businessman, this is actually even better. I can make more profit because I'm not going to have to give them the clothes that they need, and it doesn't matter. But even if I give them a wage, they're going to be worse off. So he's making the complete opposite argument 2 seconds later that actually slavery was this really nice thing, and it's actually even better for an unscrupulous businessman. It's going to be less of a financial burden to employ them. You don't have to give them all the nice clothes and the nice food and everything. So which is it? Is it collapsing the economy because you've lost the labour, or is it going to improve the economy because you don't have to treat them in this lovely way that Islamic slaves were treated? It can't be both, and yet each of them has argued the opposite position, and they're smiling at each other like goons, as if that makes sense.
Yeah, you can't weave this narrative without contradicting yourself, as we've seen. It's cringy.
It can't be done, but here's how it could be done.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And they can only get away with this because they know this guy that they're talking to really isn't gonna, either he's not knowledgeable enough at this point to sort of say, well, what about this and how about that? I mean, I think they're taking advantage of him a little bit here.
I think they take advantage of a lot of people's politeness at the corner, and I think this guy's, for the most part, being polite. He's not looking for confrontational dialogue, and they tend to run away with it. And they are, especially Abbas, they do rub it on.
Yeah, it's a perfect audience, isn't it? Somebody that's not going to argue back against everything that you're saying. So you become more emboldened and you bring out more of these hadith, and you just end up with this crazy narrative at the end of how, again, slavery is just some massive welfare system.
Yeah. Moving on.
Saying, I'm not giving you that anymore. The food that I used to eat, I used to have some nice chicken or nice lamb or whatever.
I'm not sharing that with you. No.
I ain't sharing that. You're on beans from tomorrow, mate.
Wow.
You're on lentils. Yeah, you're on barley bread, dried barley bread. What is left over, what I eat, whatever is left over, as what the peasants got in this country, right? That's what you're eating. So what would actually happen?
That's exactly what they're required to provide them. What they eat.
Exactly. It's nice to know that outside of Islam, if he wasn't a Muslim, it sounds like Abbas would be happily creating the largest slave empire you've ever seen, Branston style. So
I just like the idea. I've got this image in my head of all these slaves in Islam just sitting around to eat their lobster dinner, their 5-course dinner, and they've got the best wines that money can buy, and they're just living it large. God bless slavery.
I mean, isn't Abbas basically just explaining now, as the slave master, he wouldn't be feeding them everything that he get. He'd just be feeding them what's religiously required.
He'll have the nice piece. He'll have the nice piece of lamb, and they can have the bone to chew on, like a dog.
Bit of skin, maybe, if they're lucky.
Is that those people would end up losing the very rights that Islam gave them under servitude.
We're not advocating for it, but that's a consequence.
Yes, that would be the consequence.
Just clarify that for the camera.
And what would that lead to, Abbas? Please tell us. So suddenly you've lost the, rights of being beaten if they've been naughty, and somebody can coercively have sex with you. I mean, what's going to happen now, Abbas? These people are wandering around, finding work, and how terrible is that?
Exactly.
He is essentially. I mean, he walks it back in a second, but he has essentially, and I think he realises it, which is why he walks it back, that he has just advocated for the reintroduction of slavery. You're losing the rights that you would get as a slave. I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, and either he walks it back, or I think maybe Imran kind of does on his behalf. But you can see, look at the joy on his face talking about slavery. There were so many rights. I mean, oh dear, it is worrying if these people had power, what kind of world we would have.
Yeah, certainly.
Subhanallah, of course we're not advocating for that. And I hope as a Muslim, coming from Gujarati roots, I wouldn't do that.
They're gonna think you're evil.
But you know what I'm trying to say to you is that people lose the nuances of a discussion and they single out one statement and they try to build a picture that doesn't even exist.
The whole false narrative.
There's no context to what they're saying.
Did you want to comment?
So ironic.
These people would have actually been
So ironic, right? We've picked up points where they've been deliberately obtuse and, you know, somewhat disingenuous, and they're building a whole narrative off that. You've got to, it's like a trail of dominoes. You've got to believe that, you know, war happened in a certain way with the women on the battlefield. You've got to believe that slavery was some sort of welfare system that gave them rights, and there's just so many things you need to believe in sequence to believe this narrative. And you can see just by even slightly changing your angle and looking at some of these quote unquote hadith and facts, they just don't hold up. And he's doing exactly what he's saying that you shouldn't. He's building a whole narrative on snippets of a hadith here and there, and he's just not looking at everything together in totality.